Animation is a long process, taking months to even years to undertake, not to mention that it's expensive. Just like other mediums of entertainment, a lot of the changes are often made from initial pitch to the finished product. Most of the time these changes are small, or as small as a simple name change or design change, but every so often there's a change to a cartoon during development that is so massive the initial idea is barely visible. Today's episode is looking at the concepts that were originally conceptualized but were changed for one reason or another, whether it be censorship, the input of the cast and crew, or the idiotic choices made by the production company, which leaves us with the question about what could have been. My name is Haxus Bloodbane, and welcome to Saturday Morning Animated. 4 massive changes made to cartoons in development. The Adventures of a Magical Princess from Another Dimension have been winning over animation fans since its premiere. It's hardly difficult to see how it does this, what with the influence being video games, anime, and a perfectly timed accidental release to hitch a ride on the dimensional craze going around these days. By coincidence, to boot. An average episode of Star focuses on the use of magic either creating or solving a problem. If not, there's always magic involved in some way, which gives the show a unique flair, separating it from other cartoons and preventing it from falling into the cliché pile. It's easy to see just what a unique spin it can put on any trope or cliché with its unique style of storytelling and the fun atmosphere it sports. Anyway, it wasn't always envisioned as it is in its current state, but it isn't like the viewer wouldn't think of that right. It's set in a fantasy world with lots of magical creatures and monsters. So there are bound to be changes here or there to separate it from other properties. But what if I told you Star didn't originally have magic in the show at all? Instead of containing the crazy creative and magical elements it does now, it was originally envisioned as a grade school girl who thought she had magic powers due to an overactive imagination. A fun premise, to be honest, especially for kids, but as time passed and elements changed, Darren Nefsey decided to age up Star and take her enemy's soul, a kid obsessed with Dragon Ball Z, and mutate him into Marco. Darren even says that as time passed, she just kept aging Star up more and more, so it was a gradual change, which is a far cry from the rest of this list. The overall reason for this change is more or less the input of other people, which is how it normally goes. But in the end, it hardly matters because the show is still fantastic. It just goes to show that if you have an idea to change something, it might lead to something even more imaginative than you originally planned, even if the original plan focused on just that, imagination. Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of the undisputed kings of Western animation. Some might even go as far as to call it the pinnacle. The Eastern philosophies, the use of Industrial Revolution tropes, even the way magical and spiritual things play such massive roles in everything. Trains are run by bending, our characters fly around on a sky bison, and the most technology we see is from the Fire Nation, and even that is very Victorian at best. There are a few small changes that still fit in with the world, such as Aang having an entire herd of bison in the original pitch, even things like Toph originally being a male earthbender, the one you see in the opening, until the crew thought it would be funnier if she was a little girl instead, with the same personality. But all these are minor changes that have a few aesthetic effects on the show. But there is one change that would have had a massive effect on the entire show as a whole, and that would be being set in a steampunk world. Yep, the fantasy series we've all come to love originally was set in a completely different genre. This was eventually switched out for the more elemental-based society, which sported a rather pre-industrial revolution look to it. Of course, the entire steampunk premise would eventually be recycled for the sequel series, Legend of Korra, which is arguably equally as good as its predecessor, so it's already been proven that the original concept would have worked. The only thing left unanswered is if we'll ever see a robot Momo in the series. That depends if they decide to do a third series, but after how Korra ended, I'd say it's doubtful. Cartoon Network's smash hit Star Wars series that ran from 2008 up until it was cancelled by the Disney acquisition of Star Wars is a fantastic show set in everyone's favorite sci-fi universe. It follows some of the greatest characters from the prequel trilogy and makes for one of the best action-adventure series to date. Using groundbreaking CGI technology and using a vast array of expanded universe material to draw from, it had everything going for it. And it's so good in fact that it makes Revenge of the Sith even better than it already is. Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme, and others are fleshed out throughout the series in some of the greatest Star Wars moments ever shown. It really does make Obi-Wan's quote from A New Hope even stronger. Amidst all these favorites are some fantastic new characters like Ahsoka Tano, Captain Rex, Savage Opress, and countless minor or arc characters that expand the world. Due to the freedom it has, and the fact that it's not supposed to be watched in order, and was allowed to jump to and fro with its stories and points of view, it's incredibly hard to believe that any major changes could have occurred in development, since it had so much freedom. But, why is it here on this list? Because originally it didn't focus on our favorite characters. Now, excuse me if I butcher any of these names, but let me cast your mind back to when it was first being conceptualized. It was to star a Twi'lek Jedi named Sendak, his apprentice Ajla, a smuggler named Cad, his mistress Luke, and the Gungan strongman Lunker. Think of it bearing similarities to Firefly. Well, the series went from this original concept to the end result when Dave Filoni found out he could use the main Star Wars characters. Yep, the completely original premise was dropped because the famed characters from the galaxy could get the spotlight. Not all was lost, however. A lot of elements were harvested from the original premise, such as Ajla becoming Ahsoka, Cad becoming Cad Bane, and a vast amount of other points were picked up and turned into this absolutely fantastic series, leaving the original concept behind. But all good things must come to an end, and the Clone Wars was cancelled with many unfinished plot lines and concepts. Some will be explored in the novel Ahsoka, or followed through in other books and comics. As for the original premise and the things cut from the Clone Wars, well, my friend, I have no idea. The top pick of this list is probably the most obscure of the bunch. Jimmy Two Shoes is not exceptionally well known due to it being a rather standard cartoon from the early 2000s. It stars the titular Jimmy as a happy-go-lucky guy in a world full of demons and monsters called Miseryville. Every episode would feature some random adventure taken up by Jimmy, his idiot Patrick the Starfish clone, best friend named Beezy, and the psychotic evil inventor Heloise, who was completely in love with him. The town was ruled by the evil Lucius Heinous VII and his company Misery Inc., which sought to bring misery to everyone in Miseryville. Episodes ranged in theme and tone, from a snow day where it's fun at first, but Lucius decides to make it miserable, all the way to wrestling in the Miseryville Fighting Club. So it basically had no continuity and could do whatever it wanted. It was bashed to and fro across networks all over the place and quickly fizzled out of the public consciousness. This is likely why it got average review scores at best, with the most positive things coming from some of the elements which were a bit more risque. Dark comedy and cartoon violence were honestly the most memorable things here, beyond the hilarity that is Heloise. Now, if this reminds you of anything, perhaps the fiery pits of Satan's domain, you're right, because Jimmy Two Shoes was originally supposed to take place in hell. Yep, you heard that right. Jimmy was supposed to die in the first episode, and due to an administrative error, would have been sent to hell, ruled over by the vicious Lucifer, who'd send a serial killer after him, who would end up falling in love with him. It's a pretty dark premise, but sounds fantastic nonetheless. Some of the released art makes it look like it would take the squash and stretch cartoon logic to another level. Honestly, it looks like it would actually make for a fun dark comedy. So why was this changed? Well, it was because it wasn't kid-friendly enough. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a fantastic idea for, like, an adult, network. But if it was done right and given leeway, it would turn out fantastic. But, nonetheless, Jimmy Two Shoes takes the #1 spot because it was originally conceptualized as a dark comedy with gory visuals set in hell, turned into a subpar show for children. Sad to say, but the original pilot is lost, save for a few sketches and couple pieces of concept art, so it doesn't look like Jimmy will be getting any proper attention and the respect it deserves, even if the show would be a hit, especially nowadays, since shows like Rick and Morty have proven that just because it's an adult show doesn't mean it has to take place in suburbia. But Jimmy is a rare example of a show's changes taken to absurd levels. Most of the time when a cartoon is changed, it's for the better, removing elements that would otherwise have made the show repetitive or cringeworthy, or even adding something and turning the show into something new. Creative people find a way to be creative, even when the shows are changed. But anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for another Saturday Morning Animated.